There was a man in our village who made grown men tremble with just a look, who walked like he owned the very air we breathed. But listen closely, because by the end of this story, this same man would be washing women's underwear in the village square while children laughed and pointed at him. His name was Chike, and this is the story of how pride, cruelty, and karma danced together under the African sun until one of them fell flat on its face. Now let me take you back to a time when the compound walls had ears and secrets had legs. Our village sat between the red earth and the endless sky, where palm trees swayed like gossiping women and the marketplace buzzed with both commerce and scandal. This was a place where tradition held power, where a man's word was law in his own home, and where women's tears were considered as common as morning dew, expected, ignored, forgotten by sunrise. The elders sat under the baobab tree dispensing wisdom that always seemed to favor those with the deepest voices and the heaviest fists. And into this world walked Chike, 25 years old, shoulders broad as a doorway, ego bigger than the village itself. Chike wasn't just big, he was the kind of big that made people step aside when he approached the water well. His father had been a warrior, his grandfather a chief, and Chike carried that legacy like a weapon, reminding everyone that greatness ran in his blood. He worked his farm with the same intensity he brought to everything else, aggressive, dominating, always proving something to someone. The young men admired him, wanted to be him. The old men nodded approvingly when he passed. And the women watched him with that particular caution reserved for beautiful snakes, attractive from a distance, deadly up close. But Chike didn't care what women thought. To him, women were like cooking pots, necessary, useful, easily replaced if they cracked under pressure. His mother had been quiet, his grandmother had been quiet, and Chike believed this was the natural order of things. Men speak, women listen, men command, women obey, and if a woman forgot her place, well, there were ways to remind her. The day Chike married Amara, the whole village gathered to celebrate. Amara was a vision, 22 years old with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that held entire universes of gentleness. She had been raised right, people whispered approvingly. Her mother had trained her in the ways of proper wifehood, how to grind pepper until your arms ached, how to balance water pots on your head without spilling a drop, how to lower your eyes when men spoke, how to swallow your words before they became arguments, how to survive. Chike's chest swelled with pride as he placed the wedding beads around her neck. Finally, he thought, watching her bow her head in submission, a woman who understands her place, a woman who will give me no trouble, a woman I can mold like fresh clay. The wedding feast lasted until the moon hung high and fat in the sky. Palm wine flowed, drums echoed through the compound, and everyone danced except Amara, who sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, already learning the stillness that would define her marriage. But honeymoons don't last forever, especially when built on foundations of control and fear. It started just 3 days after the wedding, so quick you'd miss it if you blinked. Amara had prepared dinner, fufu, and egusi soup, the kind that makes your mouth water just from the aroma. She served it with trembling hands, this being only her third meal as a wife, desperate to please, terrified to fail. Chike tasted it, and his face twisted like he'd bitten into raw ginger. "This soup is cold," he announced, his voice filling the small room like thunder. "Cold like you want to kill me, like you're trying to poison your own husband." Amara's heart dropped into her stomach. "My husband, please let me warm it. I can fix it right now." "Warm it?" His voice rose, attracting the attention of neighbors who would later pretend they heard nothing. "Do I look like a man who eats cold food? Am I a beggar in my own house? The soup wasn't cold. You need to understand this. The soup was perfectly warm, steam still rising from the bowl. But Chike didn't need a real reason. He needed an excuse, a justification for what he was about to do, what he'd probably planned to do from the very beginning. The slap came fast and hard, splitting Amara's lip, painting her gentle face with the first of many bruises. She fell against the wall, more from shock than impact, her hand flying to her mouth as blood mixed with tears. And Chike sat down and ate his perfectly warm soup, belching with satisfaction while his new bride sobbed quietly in the corner, learning the first and most important lesson of her marriage. There would be no winning, only surviving. What followed became the rhythm of their lives, a terrible dance where Chike led and Amara could only follow. If she cooked, he complained the food was too salty. If she adjusted the salt, it became too bland. If she cleaned the house, he'd run his finger along a beam and declare it dusty. If she spoke, she was too loud. If she stayed silent, she was sulking, disrespecting him with her silence. Every day brought a new offense, every evening a new punishment. His fists became as familiar to her as his face, perhaps more so, since she spent most of their marriage looking at the ground. The village knew, of course villages always know. At the stream where women gathered to wash clothes, they'd see Amara's bruises blooming like dark flowers on her arms, her back, her legs. They'd exchange glances heavy with meaning but light on action. The older women would shake their heads and click their tongues. Men will be men, they'd say, as if cruelty was as natural as breathing. It's not our place to interfere. A man must control his household. Better she learns now than later. Even Amara's own mother, when her daughter came crying with a blackened eye, turned her away with words wrapped in tradition. You must endure, my daughter. Marriage is not meant to be easy. Make yourself more pleasing to him. Cook better, clean better, speak less, smile more, disappear into the shape he wants you to be. So Amara tried, God knows she tried, to become smaller, quieter, more invisible. But it was never enough because the problem wasn't Amara. The problem was Chaik, and problems like Chaik don't fix themselves with better cooking. 7 years passed like this. 7 years of walking on eggshells that constantly shattered under her feet. Amara, who had once been vibrant and full of dreams, became a ghost haunting her own life. Her body grew thin, bones pressing against skin like they were trying to escape. Her eyes lost their light, becoming dull and distant, windows to an empty room. She stopped laughing, that sound Chaik had found irritating anyway. She stopped talking except when directly addressed. She moved through the compound like smoke, present but not really there, going through the motions of life without actually living. The other women stopped trying to talk to her at the stream. What was the point? Amara had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, somewhere Chaik's fists couldn't reach, somewhere safe and silent and slowly dying. And then one night, after a beating so severe that even Chaik seemed shocked by his own violence, after he'd finally stumbled to bed drunk on palm wine and righteousness, Amara lay down on her mat and simply decided she'd had enough. Her body, worn down by years of abuse, gave up. Just like that, like a candle finally burning down to nothing. She went asleep and never woke up. The village herbalist examined her body, pressing his gnarled fingers against her still chest, checking for signs of poison or disease. He found nothing physical, nothing he could name, but he knew they all knew. Her spirit left, he announced solemnly. She was tired. The funeral was a spectacle worthy of the finest actors. Chaik wept, oh how he wept, tears streaming down his face like rivers of regret. He threw himself on her grave, crying out her name like she'd been his greatest love, his missing piece, his reason for breathing. Poor Chaik, the sympathetic mourners whispered, the ones who didn't know the truth, who hadn't heard the screams, who had convinced themselves that closed doors meant private happiness. He loved her so much. See how he suffers. If only they knew that Chaik's tears were for himself, for the inconvenience of having to find another wife, for the temporary blow to his reputation, not for the gentle soul he'd systematically destroyed over 7 years. He observed the mourning period with perfect propriety, wearing white, receiving visitors, accepting condolences with the humble grace of a man wronged by fate rather than a murderer who used his fists instead of poison. But grief, real or performed, doesn't last forever, and neither did Chaik's patience. Exactly 3 months after burying Amara, he began his search for wife number 2. This time he told himself, stirring his morning tea with calculated precision, this time I'll be smarter. I'll find a woman from far away, someone who hasn't heard the village gossip, someone fresh and unspoiled by rumors. Someone who doesn't know about Amara. He traveled to a neighboring village, 3 days' journey by foot, far enough that news traveled slowly, if at all. And that's where he found her. Enkem. Beautiful Enkem with her downcast eyes and soft voice. 22 years old, the same age Amara had been, a coincidence Chaik found pleasing. She seemed perfect, obedient, respectful, properly trained. Her father, a poor farmer drowning in debt, practically pushed her into Chaik's arms when he saw the bride price, generous enough to solve all his problems. My daughter never argues, never raises her voice, the father promised, selling his child like merchandise. She will make you a good wife. Chaik smiled, already imagining his return to the village, his new bride in tow, his reputation as a man who could control women restored. Another quiet one, he thought with satisfaction. Another woman who knows her place. But here's what Chaik didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he handed over the bride price with confident hands, what would eventually turn his entire world upside down and inside out. Enkem wasn't what she appeared to be. Behind those downcast eyes lurked something Chaik had never encountered in his entire life, something more dangerous than anger, more powerful than physical strength, something that would teach him lessons he never wanted to learn. Because you see, Enkem had done something Amara never had the chance to do. She had asked questions, she had listened, she had learned, and she had made a plan. The wedding was small, quiet, almost too quiet, like the silence before lightning strikes. Enkem moved into Chaik's house with nothing but a small wooden box and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And from that very first night, she became exactly what Chaik wanted, the perfect wife, the obedient shadow, the woman who jumped at his voice and trembled at his footsteps. But here's what you need to understand. Here's the truth that was hiding in plain sight while Chaik congratulated himself on his brilliant choice. Enkem had already been to his village. 3 weeks before the wedding, while Chaik was busy negotiating bride price with her father, Enkem had made a journey, alone, unannounced, dressed in old clothes so nobody would recognize her as a bride-to-be. She went to the marketplace where women's tongues are sharper than any knife, where secrets spill easier than palm wine, and she asked questions. Innocent questions, careful questions. "Tell me about the men here," she'd said, smiling sweetly at the old women selling vegetables. "Are they good husbands?" And oh, how those women talked. They told her everything. About Chaik's first wife, gentle Amara, who died too young. About the screams that echoed through the compound walls on too many nights. About bruises that makeup couldn't hide and tears that prayers couldn't stop. About a man whose fists were faster than his brain and whose pride was bigger than his heart. One old woman, Mama Adana, had even grabbed Enkem's wrist and said, "My daughter, if you're thinking of marrying into that compound, run, run far and never look back." But Enkem didn't run. Instead, she smiled that same quiet smile and said, "Thank you, Mama, thank you for the warning." What the old woman didn't see, what nobody could see, was the cold fire that had lit behind Enkem's eyes, the kind of determination that turns soft women into steel, the kind of purpose that transforms victims into warriors. Because Enkem had made a decision right there in that dusty marketplace surrounded by tomatoes and truth. She would marry Chaik, yes, but not to be his wife. She would marry him to be his reckoning. So for 6 months, Enkem played her role with the dedication of a master actress. She woke before the roosters crowed, had breakfast waiting before Chaik opened his eyes. The house sparkled like new money. His clothes were always pressed, his bath water always warm, his ego always fed with "yes, husband, of course, husband, whatever you say, husband." When he raised his voice, she flinched right on cue. When he threw plates, she cleaned up the pieces without complaint. When he lifted his hand as if to strike, she cowered and begged, "Please, I'm sorry, I'll do better." Her voice shaking with what he thought was fear but was actually rage, cold and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. And Chaik ate it all up like sweet honey. He strutted through the village, chest puffed out like a rooster in a henhouse, telling the other men, "You see, the secret is control. Establish dominance early and they'll never challenge you. Look at my Enkem, quiet as a mouse, obedient as a well-trained dog." But what Chaik didn't know, what his pride wouldn't let him see, was that Enkem was studying him like a hunter studies prey. Every habit, every weakness, every moment when his guard was down, she cataloged it all, building a map of his vulnerabilities, preparing for war while he thought she was preparing his dinner. Now I want you to pay close attention to what happened next, because this is the moment when everything changed, when the mouse revealed herself to be a lioness, when the quiet wife showed her teeth. It was a Tuesday morning, 6 months to the day after their wedding, and something felt different in the air, charged, electric like the atmosphere before a storm breaks. Chaik woke up expecting his usual breakfast, the routine that had become as natural to him as breathing. But when he walked into the kitchen, the table was empty, the pots were cold, and there was no smell of cooking, no sound of movement, nothing. His anger rose immediately, that familiar heat flooding his chest, that sense of being disrespected, disobeyed, challenged in his own house. He stormed toward the bedroom, fists already clenching, ready to remind this woman of her place, ready to do what he'd done to Amara 1,000 times before. But when he burst through that door, what he saw stopped him cold. Enkem was lying in bed, calm as still water, reading a book. And when she looked up at him, there was something in her eyes that Chaik had never seen before, something that made his blood run cold even as his anger burned hot. And in that split second before everything exploded, I want you to ask yourself this. What do you think Chaik saw in those eyes? Was it defiance? Was it danger? Or was it something far worse, something that would haunt him for the rest of his life? Because whatever it was, Chaik's world was about to shatter into a million pieces, and there would be no putting it back together again. In one movement, so fast it seemed like magic, Enkem rolled off that bed, grabbed Chaik's extended arm, and twisted it behind his back with a strength that shocked them both. Before his brain could process what was happening, before his pride could even catch up to reality, Chaik's face was pressed against the cold floor, his arm bent at an angle that promised pain if he struggled, his mighty body completely helpless under his small wife's iron grip. "Let me go," he screamed, but his voice cracked with something he'd never felt before, genuine fear. Enkem's voice, when she spoke, was calm as morning water, almost cheerful. "No, my dear husband," she said, applying just enough pressure to make him gasp. "Not yet. We need to talk first, you see. Before I married you, I went to your village. I spoke to the women at the market. I heard everything about Amara, every beating, every scream, every tear, how she died because your fists were heavier than your conscience. Chaik's blood turned to ice, you knew. Oh yes, I knew everything, and I married you anyway because someone needed to teach you what Amara couldn't. Someone needed to show you what powerlessness feels like, what fear tastes like, what justice looks like when it finally arrives." She released him then, and Chaik scrambled backward like a crab, panting, confused, his entire understanding of the world crumbling like old clay. From this moment forward, Enkem announced, standing over him like a queen addressing a subject, "You will cook, you will clean, you will wash my clothes, you will fetch water. You will serve me the way you forced Amara to serve you. And if you refuse, if you even think about refusing, I will walk to the village square and tell everyone how you murdered your first wife. I have witnesses. I have evidence. They will chase you out of this village with nothing but the shame you've earned." But I'm a man," Chaik stammered, grasping at the only identity he'd ever known. "Oh, you're a man now?" Enkem laughed, a sound like bells and knives mixed together. "Is that the same kind of man who beat a defenseless woman for 7 years? That kind of man?" Chaik had no answer, and his silence sealed his fate. That very morning, while the sun was still climbing the sky, Chaik stood in his own kitchen, hands trembling as he tried to remember how fire worked, how water boiled, how food cooked, tasks he'd always considered beneath him, women's work, shameful work. And Enkem? Enkem sat on the veranda like a queen on her throne, watching, correcting, completely in control. The beans burned, the tea was bitter, and Enkem made him eat his failures and start again, a perfect reversal of all the times he'd thrown Amara's perfectly good food on the floor just to prove he could. By afternoon, the news had spread through the village faster than fire through dry grass. Women abandoned their washing, men left their palm wine, children stopped their games. Everyone needed to see this miracle with their own eyes. And there he was, Chaik the Terrible, Chaik the Proud, kneeling by the washing stone, scrubbing women's clothes while his wife sat in the shade giving instructions. The transformation was so complete, so absolute, that people rubbed their eyes thinking they were seeing spirits. "Chaik," one of his old friends called out, barely containing his laughter, "is that really you doing women's work?" But before Chaik could respond, before his shame could find words, Enkem's voice cut through the air like a machete. "My husband is helping me today," she said sweetly. "Is there a problem with a man helping his wife?" The friend disappeared quickly, but his laughter echoed down the road, and Chaik knew that sound would follow him forever. Over the following weeks and months, Chaik tried to rebel, of course he did. Pride dies hard in men like him. He refused to fetch water once, declaring that men don't carry pots on their heads. Enkem simply smiled that dangerous smile and said, "Fetch the water or I visit the village square this afternoon and tell everyone what kind of man you really are." He fetched the water. He tried to raise his hand to her again, bigger mistake. Enkem didn't just defend herself. She chased him around the compound with a broom, beating him on his backside while he ran and screamed, and the neighbors gathered to watch this better-than-cinema entertainment. Time passed, as it always does, and Chaik's transformation became permanent. His muscles softened from housework instead of farm work. His voice, once loud and commanding, became quiet and meek. He walked through the village with his head down, humble as a church mouse, carrying water on his head while children giggled and old men shook their heads in disbelief. The village had changed too. Mothers started telling their daughters, "Be like Enkem, don't let anyone think they can break you. Strength isn't about staying quiet, it's about knowing when to roar." And they told their sons, "Treat women with respect or you might end up like Chaik, washing underwear while the whole village laughs." One evening, Mama Ngozi, the oldest woman in the village, came to visit Enkem. She found her relaxing under the mango tree while Chaik swept the compound, and she asked the question everyone wanted answered. "My daughter, how did you do it? How did you break a man everyone feared?" Enkem's answer was simple but profound. Bullies are cowards at heart, Mama. Chike was only brave when facing people weaker than himself. But when he met someone who matched his strength, he crumbled like old bread. I didn't break him. I just removed his mask and showed everyone who he really was underneath. But the question that haunted the village, the question that whispered through the compound late at night when Chike lay on his mat on the floor while Enkem slept in the bed, was this. If Chike could go back, would he change? Would he treat Amara differently? Would he choose kindness over cruelty? The truth is, we'll never know because Chike never spoke about it. He just continued his days, cooking, cleaning, obeying, a living monument to the consequences of unchecked cruelty. And Enkem, she would visit Amara's grave every month, placing fresh flowers on the red earth, whispering words meant only for the dead. I did it, sister, rest well. Justice came late, but it came. The story of Chike spread far beyond our village, carried by travelers and traders until it became legend. A cautionary tale told around fires and in marketplaces across the land. Remember this, my friends, strength is not about who can hit harder. It's about who can stand up when everyone else stays silent. It's about knowing that bullies only thrive when good people do nothing. And sometimes, just sometimes, karma arrives wearing a patient smile and carrying a very specific plan. Now I have a question for you, and I want you to really think about this before you answer in the comments below. Do you think Enkem was right to do what she did? Was this justice, or was it revenge? Is there even a difference when the law fails and the community stays silent? And here's the bigger question. If you knew someone like Amara, suffering in silence while everyone looked away, what would you do? Would you be like the village that ignored her cries, or would you be like Enkem who refused to let evil go unpunished? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories that make you think, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because some stories aren't just entertainment, they're warnings, they're lessons, they're calls to action. The question isn't whether you enjoyed this story, the question is, what will you do with it now that you know?